And now will you sit back, relax and enjoy once again that master of comedy, the Joker himself, Shaun Connors.
When first I came to Dublin town to a good old Ballyatlia, I went direct with me head erect for to join the DMP. As me ponderous feet walked Kevin Street, and I walked with alacrity, for well I knew they could not do without Guard Moriarty. I'm a well-known Bobby of the stalwart squad, I belong to the DMP, and the ladies cry when I pass by, are you there, Moriarty?
Oh, brings back memories of the day I joined the force. I remember coming up from Kerry, the uncle driving the car. We were passing by a farmyard down near Naas. Had a bit of an accident. He killed this woman's rooster, her cockerel, outside the farm. Went into the farm, he says, Mrs, I've killed your rooster, I'd like to replace it. She says, please yourself, the hen's around the back. Well, I went up to the depot in the Phoenix Park and the sergeant said to me, well, young man, he says, we have to ask you some questions to see if you're clever enough to be a guard. Questions on general knowledge. Could you tell me what's a hen do? I says, it lays eggs. Says, what's a Hebrew? Says, a male teabag. What was Gandhi's first name? He said, Goosey Goosey. A question on geography, where are the Andes? Says, on the end of my wristies. A question on chemistry, it says, what is nitrate? It says, time and a half. Who was the first man to ride a motorbike? I said, Moses. He says, how do you make that out? I says, I read in the Bible that you could hear the roar of Moses' triumph. He said, one final question now, young man. He says, who killed Cock Robin? I said, I haven't got a clue. Well, he said, as soon as you find out, he says, come back and tell me. I'm going out the door, there's a fella standing there. He says, are you a policeman now? I says, I think I'm a detective. They put me on a murder case. I'll never forget my first day on the beat. I found a dead horse in a place called Exchequer Street. I couldn't spell it and I had to drag it round into James Street. It's only a joke. I stopped a fellow one night. I said, are you a Jehovah's Witness? He says, officer, he says, I never even saw the accident. Parking is a problem all over the world, though, isn't it? I found a fella the other day lying on the side of the street. I said, get up, you're drunk. He says, I'm not drunk. I said, get up, you're drunk. He says, I'm not drunk. He says, what are you doing lying down there? He says, I'm after finding a parking space. I've sent the wife home for the car. Fella driving the other day, he was going left, right, left, right. I jumped out. I says, you're drunk. He says, thank God, officer, I thought the steering had gone. Another fellow was walking in front of me like this. I caught up and I said, have you hurt your back? He says, no, I saw a sign down the road that says, bend for half a mile. Would you ever notice, no matter where you are in the world, when a policeman stops you, he always pulls about 30 yards in front of you. Gets out of the car and does the John Wayne walk back. And you're sitting there on your own, knowing with you, and you roll down the window and he says, are you the driver of this vehicle? I said, no, it's automatic, but I got to be here just in case. I stopped a fellow one night. I walked over, I put my head in the window. I was very unlucky because the window was closed. I said, blow into this. He says, is this the breathalyzer? He says, no, it's my gloves. My hands are cold. I said, you're driving up a one-way street. I says, did you not see the arrows? He says, officer, he says, I never even saw the Indians. Stopped a fellow one night. I says, your right front light is not working. He says, stay where you are, officer. He gave it a kick and a come on. I said, your left rear light is not working. He says, stay where you are, officer. He gave it a kick and a come on. I said, you better hop up on the bonnet now and kick the windscreen. He says, what will I do that for, officer? I said, to see will this year's registration appear. I stopped a fellow one night. I said, blow into this. He says, what's that? I says, this is an old bag which tells me if you're drunk. He says, I've got one of them at home. It's only a joke. That's not fair to talk about the wife, is it? No. My wife went to the doctor. The doctor told her she was too fat. She was unfit. She was to run 10 miles every day for a week. Thank God tomorrow she'll be 70 miles away. I've the mother-in-law coming up for our dinner tomorrow. I cut the dog's tail off so he wouldn't show any signs of welcome. Hope we've no mother-in-laws in tonight, have we? We've a lovely photograph of her over the mantelpiece. Keeps the kids away from the fire. No, I've been married twice myself, actually. Suppose you got to get married sometime, don't you, sister? You can't go through all your life being happy, huh? My first wife drowned in a wishing well. I didn't know they worked. No, I'm telling a lie, actually. First wife died of eating poisoning mushrooms. Second wife died of a fractured skull. She wouldn't eat her mushrooms. I was on duty there in a place in the city the other night. Big coloured girl come up to me. She says, you want to take me home, man? I said, who wants to go to Africa this hour of the night? I said, I'd like to see your driving licence. He says, you're not going to see it. I said, if you don't let me see your driving licence, I'll arrest you. He says, I couldn't care less. And his wife leans over and says, guard, never argue with that man while he's had a lot to drink. I took him down to the station. The sergeant says, what's this man in for? I says, he's in for drunken driving. He says, why didn't you ring for the police car to get him down? I said, there was no need. The man gave me a lift. Only a joke. Another day I was missing all day. She says, where were you? I says, I was down at the cemetery. She says, who's dead? I says, they all are. I was trying to go to America there, trying to emigrate for a while there. I went for a job in the New York tax department. Fella asked me what was 32 and 32. I said 96. I got the job. I was the nearest. Another friend of mine, he's thinking of going to Canada. He saw a sign on a bus that said, drink Canada dry. He went for an interview for a job as a lumberjack. And the fella says, have you got any experience? He says, I have. For years I worked in the Sahara forest. He says, you mean the Sahara Desert? He says, is that what they call it now? No, a few years ago, before they abolished hanging over here in Ireland, I remember being up there and there was a fella being hanged and the executioner says, "What's your last request?" He says, "Do me a favour, will you? Put the rope around me waist." He says, "What'll I do that for?" He says, "I got a boil on my neck." But I was at a wedding down in Kerry recently. One of the Vanguardi, one of the female officers, was getting married. Now, I know it's a woman's privilege to be ugly, but this woman abused the privilege. The priest said, "Do you take this woman to be a lawful wedded wife?" He says, "I do." The priest says, "I'll ask you again." The woman was 200 pounds weight. The priest said, "Do you take this woman or do you want her delivered?" I went up to the priest and says, "What do I owe you?" He says, "Give me what you think it's worth." I gave him $1, he gave me 95 cents change. Well, they come up to Dublin on the honeymoon, they booked into the Gresham Hotel. She says, "The room is very small." He said, "Shut up, you're still in the elevator." Next day she went shopping, she went into the store, she said, "A pound of bacon." The grocer said, "Lean." She says, "A pound of bacon." Next day he took her up to the zoo, the zookeeper says, "Keep that woman moving, we're doing an inventory." She was in the reptile house. She was looking at the reptile. She was sticking her tongue out like this. He says, "What are you doing?" She says, "They started it." I stopped two fellas in a car the other night. He says to the first fella, says, "What's your name?" He says, "Mickey Delaney." He says, "Where do you live?" He says, "No fixed abode." Says the next fella, "What's your name?" He says, "MJ O'Sullivan." He says, "Where do you live?" He says, "The apartment above him." I was on duty out there at the spring show recently. A fella come up, he says, "Officer, it's lovely weather, spring in the air." I said, "Spring in the air yourself." I said, "What are you doing in this neck of the woods?" Well, he says, "I come up to the spring show, I'd like to see the prize bull." I said, "I know the chap who's in charge." I says, "I'll save you some money. Come in." Took him in and said, "Michael, chap up here from Kerry wants to see the prize bull." Says, "Guard Moriarty, he'll have to come back tomorrow. The prize bull is locked up. He won't be out till tomorrow morning." The man says, "I can't come back tomorrow." He says, "If you want to see the prize bull, you've got to come back tomorrow." He says, "How can I come back tomorrow? I've got to get the train at 6 o'clock. I've got to be back down in Kerry. The wife and 26 kids are waiting on me at the railway station to take me home with the pony and trap." He says, "Hold on." He says, "How many kids did you say you have?" He says, "I've got 26. He says, "Stay where you are. I'll bring the bull out to see you." It's over you, Joe. Stopped three fellas in the car the other day. I says to the first, "What's your name?" He says, "Hold on, sir." He says, "Look out." W.F. Walworth. Down in the book. Says to the second one, "What's your name?" He says, "Hold it." Sears Roebuck. Down in the book. Says the third fellow, "What's your name?" He said, "My name is Ken." I says, "Ken what?" He says, "Hold it." "Kentucky Fried Chicken." I was standing in O'Connell Street the other day. A senior citizen come up to me. He says, "Officer," he says, "could you see me across the road?" I says, "Hang on, sir, I'll go over and have a look." And there's a Kerry fella and he's running out. And I said, "Will you take your time? There's a zebra crossing down there." He says, "I hope he's having better luck than I am." I had a brother, actually. He was in the police force as well. I had a letter from him the other day. I didn't get a chance to read it. It says, "Dear Shaun, I like it here in England. The English people are great. It's the white people I can't get on with."
I don't understand the signs on the bus stops. I saw one which said, line up other side. I did, and I missed the bus. I went to the doctor and I told him I had wind and he gave me a kite. He's not much of a doctor. He was treating a fella for jaundice for 3 years and then he discovered he was a Jap. I told the doctor I wanted more sleeping tablets for the wife because she has woken up. Your granny, who's been bedridden for the last 20 years, come down the stairs today for the first time. The funeral is at 2 o'clock. I'm waiting to put the cat out, but he hasn't come in yet. I was in Sears Roebuck store the other day, and I saw a sign which said, dogs must be carried up the escalator. And I was standing there for 3 hours waiting on a dog. When I got up to the top, there was a sign that said, restrooms out of order, please use ground floor. The new apartment is lovely, but there's something wrong with the washing machine. I put 6 shirts in yesterday, pulled the chain, I haven't seen one of them since. Your brother Paddy has been in prison for 6 months. During the first month, he had his tonsils, his appendix, and his gallbladder removed. Now the doctors think he's trying to escape bit by bit. The man next door has got 3 wooden legs from the doctor in the last 3 weeks. Now the doctor thinks he's making a coffee table. When you said my cousin Nellie Dunn was living in London WC1, I found the place marked WC, and I knocked on the door marked 1. And I asked the lady, was she Nellie Dunn? But she said she was only starting. I would have enclosed some money, but I've already sealed the envelope. Nice to get a letter off a brother, isn't it? We were coming out of the football game there last week, and Gard Delaney was with me, and a couple of weeks earlier he was after having the appendix out. And the doctors had a bit of a joke, you see, they took out his appendix and they put in 2 pickled onions instead. So he spots the doctor, he says, I want a word with you. He says, are you a fully qualified doctor? He says, of course I'm a fully qualified doctor, I wouldn't be doing appendectomies if I wasn't. But you know the feeling comes over a man. You know, when the girls are walking by and wearing the mini skirts, you know that feeling comes over a man. He says, of course I do. He says, I'm a man as well as a doctor, why do you ask me that? Well, he says, it's very strange. I get the same feeling when I see a cheese sandwich. Well, they sent me down to Pierce Street Station. I went for the medical. The sergeant said to me, right, go in and see the doctor now. I went into the doctor. He says, have you anything wrong with you? I says, I think I've got flat feet. So he gave me a foot pump. Then he told me to put on a clean pair of socks every day for a week. At the end of the week, I couldn't get my boots on. They sent me down to Pierce Street Station. Sergeant says, well, he says, you're sharing room 12 with Gard Delaney from Kerry. Now, Gard Delaney has a dreadful habit of snoring. No man snores as much as this man. Men have left the job, he snores so much. I said, Sergeant, his snoring won't bother me. He says, we'll find out in the morning, boy. Come down the next morning, he says, well, did you get your sleep? I said, Sergeant, I had the best sleep I ever had in my life. He says, what about Gard Delaney snoring? I said, went into the room, he was lying on his back, snoring his head off. I leaned over and gave him a kiss on the cheek, and he sat up all night watching me. When I moved out of the station anyway, I had to go and look for an apartment for myself. I was going all around Dublin looking for a place. I knocked on the door, a woman opened the door. She says, what do you want? I says, Mrs., I says, I'd like to stay here. She says, stay there, and she closed the door in my face. I went up to the next house. I said, Mrs., I'm looking for bed and breakfast. She says, that'll be $10 a night. I says, I'll pay that with pleasure. She says, with pleasure, it's an extra 10. Well, I was there for a while anyway. I called the woman aside one day. I said, Mrs., you'll have to do something about that sign on my bedroom wall. I said, if my mother comes up to visit me, there'll be terrible trouble. She says, what sign are you talking about? I said, that sign that says, be in bed before I am. She says, what are you talking about? I said, come up and I'll show you. Look, there it is there. Be in bed before I am. She says, how legit is be in bed before 1 a.m. She said to me one day, she says, did you give the goldfish fresh water this morning? I says, I never drank the water I gave them yesterday morning. She says to me, there's a fella knocking on the door with a beard. I says, no wonder I couldn't hear him. I was on duty one day, you know, and an awful lot of poaching goes on around Ireland, poaching for fish. And there was two Kerrymans I was watching in the bushes, you see, one day, and two Kerry fellas met these two lads from Dublin, you see. And they said, two Dublin lads have two big fish under the arm, two salmon. He says, where'd you get the fish, lads? The man says, we're doing a bit of poaching down there at the river. The man says, how do you do that? He says, I lie over the bridge, you see, and my friend holds me ankles. And when the salmon jump out, we grab them, a couple of karate chops. We done well today, 4 salmon. Two lads says, we'll go down and have a go at this. Well, the two of them go down, Paddy's lying over the bridge and Mick is holding his ankles. He's down there about 20 minutes, he shouts, pull me up, pull me up. He says, have you caught one? He says, no, he says, there's a train coming. It's only a joke. Another day I was watching two Kerrymen there and they were laying these flagstones. And there's a fella watching him sitting there in a Rolls Royce car. So the two Kerrymen get a bit curious. Go over to your man, he says, are you at this business yourself? No, says your man, he says, I'm a precision engineer. The man says, what does that mean? He says, well, what it means really is that I've got to work to within 1,000th of an inch. The Kerry fella says, that'll be no good to us. He says, we've got to be spot on. Quite recently, Mrs. Thatcher, the English Prime Minister, came over to visit our Prime Minister, Mr. Fitzgerald, and she was arriving at Dublin Airport on the plane. She says to the hostess, she says, young lady, there's a £20 note, throw it out the window and it'll make somebody happy. The hostess says, why don't you get 2 10s, throw them out and make 2 people happy? No, she says, better still, get me 4 5s, I'll throw them out and make 4 people happy. The hostess says, why don't you get 21 pound notes and throw them out and make 20 people happy? The fella sitting beside her, he says, why don't you throw yourself out and make everybody happy? A few years ago, a gentleman from the other end of Ireland, Mr. Ian Paisley, he attempted to get into America and he was refused. But he was walking to a hospital ward in Belfast and there was 12 beds. And on 9 of them, there was a big P. On the other 3, there was RC. He says, hey, see, sister, the Church of Rome is not very well represented in this ward this morning. See, what do you mean, Mr. Paisley? Well, he says, there's 12 beds, 9 with P on them, 9 proud Protestants, probably members of my flock. Over there's only 3 RCs, 3 Roman Catholics. She says, oh, Mr. Paisley, I have it wrong. Those 9 fellas are having porridge in the morning, the other 3 are having Rice Krispies. Shortly before he died, Mr. Androfoff came over here and he met this chap from Kerry, you see. And Mr. Androfoff says, is it true the people of Ireland are to declare war on Russia? He says, it is, and we'll beat you. Irish Air Force, how big? Well, he says, out there in Baldonnel there's a few little airplanes. The lads use them the weekend to take the kids out, you know. Give the wife a break. Says, in Russia we have 2,000 large aircraft. We have lost count of the small ones. Says, the war is still on and we still beat you. Irish Navy, how big? Well, says, we've got a navy down there in Cork. It's the only navy in the world where the lads go home from 1 to 2 for lunch. Says, in Russia we have 2,000 large battleships. We have lost count of the small ones. Says, the war is still on and we'll still beat you. Irish population, how many? Well, he says, at the last count it was 3.5 million. Says, in Russia we have 2,000 million. He says, the war is off. Says, why is the war off? So we've nowhere to put all those prisoners of war. It's only a joke. An American friend of mine come up to me, he says, have you got a Disneyland here in Ireland? So I took him up to our House of Parliament. He said, what's that building there, man? I said, Dáil Éireann. I said, the House of Parliament. It's similar to the White House in America. He says, a fine building. He says, but back in the States, the White House is 200 times the size of that. I said, I see. Brought him into the car, took him further up the road. I said, that's one of our biggest and most modern hospitals in Europe. He says, a fine hospital. But he says, back in the States, our hospitals like that are 500 times the size of that. I says, I'm not surprised. That's a mental hospital. I was taking him around Dublin. I took him out to Clontarf. I said, Brian Boru fought the Danes there 10-14. Looked at his watch. He says, by gad, he says, we've just missed it. I went over to America recently and was standing at Dublin Airport and I met this Kerry chap and I said, are you travelling to the States as well? No, he says, I'm waiting on my brother. He's coming back from America. His aeroplane is due in shortly. I says, he been in America very long? Oh, he's over there 25 years. I says, he's been back and forth on vacation. Oh, no, he's never been back from the day he left Ireland. I says, will you recognise him when you see him? He says, how will I recognise the man when I see him? He's been away 25 years. He says, will he recognise you? He says, of course he will. He says, I haven't been away. It's only a joke. Well, we got on the plane and it suddenly come over the tonneau. Attention, please. This is your captain of Aer Lingus Flight 105E to Kennedy speaking. If you look out the window on your right-hand side, you will see number 1 and number 2 engines are on fire. If you look out the window on your left, you will see number 3 and number 4 engines are on fire. If you look into the sea, you will see yellow speck. This is a rubber dinghy containing myself and my crew. This is a recording. I said to the pilot, says, hi, Jack, and he flew me to Cuba. Hi, Jack. Well, the hostess is handing out the landing cards, and the Kerry fella says, what are those things that woman has given out? I said, the landing cards. Said, it's to do with immigration. You've got to fill them in, or you won't be let off the plane. Right, he says, give us your pen. Name, Mickey Delaney. Address, 23 Main Street, Bannock, County Kerry. Age, 36. Sex, once in Killarney. Well, we got off the plane and we're walking through New York and there's one of these multi-storey apartment blocks on fire and there's a Kerry chap on top and the fire department were there with a blanket and they're shouting, jump into the blanket, man, save your life. He says, no, I know you fellas, because when I'm from Kerry, when I jump, you pull the blanket out of the way. Put the blanket on the ground and then I'll jump. We went into a bar, actually, and I was very, very interested in watching a television program, and there was a chap watching. I said, would you mind switching over? The American football is on. I've never seen it before in my life. And no, I'm not watching American football. I said, well, there's ice hockey. I'd like to... No, ice hockey, no. I said, there's boxing. No, not boxing. I said, what do you go in for? He said, well, I don't like ice hockey. I don't like American football. I don't like boxing. He said, I go eat my women. Women, 5 times a day. I said, women 5 times a day. He said, that'd kill you. No, women. It's only a joke. Well, we went into another bar. There was a big sign outside called Pig and Whistle. Name of the place, Pig and Whistle. He says, we'll go in and get 2 beers here. Went in and said, 2 beers, please. I said, I'm sorry. He said, we don't serve Irishmen. I said, could I see the owner? Well, he says, this is a partnership. He says, there's 2 partners. He says, I'm one of the partners, so that makes me the owner, and you're not being served. Right? He says, could I have a word with Mr. Whistle, please? Fella goes for a job. The boss says, can you make tea? He says, I can, sir. He says, can you drive a forklift truck? He says, why? How big are the teapots? 2 Kerry fellas sitting in a bar opposite a full-length mirror. A woman says, Mick, will you have a look over there? There's 2 fellas over there, and they're the image of us. They're like our twins. I'm going over to buy them a drink. And he stood up, and the other fella says, sit down for God's sake. There's one coming over here, he might buy us one. Fella gets onto the maternity hospital. He says, this is Mr. Murphy. What's the news on Mrs. Murphy? He says, twins, a boy and a girl. Don't rush away. It's not all over yet. Ring back in half an hour. Half an hour later, he's on the phone. He says, oh, this is Mr. Murphy. What's the news on Mrs. Murphy? He says, triplets, 2 boys, 1 girl. Don't rush away. It's not all over yet. Ring back in half an hour. Half an hour later, he's on the phone again. He says, oh, this is Mr. Murphy. What's the news on Mrs. Murphy? He says, Mr. Murphy, congratulations. You got quads. 2 boys, 2 girls. But don't rush away. It's not all over yet. Ring back in half an hour. Have a few drinks. But he goes into the bar. He's about 6 pints of draft Guinness and 6 large Irish whiskies. He picks up the phone. He dials the wrong number. He gets through to the local cricket ground. He says, this is Mr. Murphy. What's the news? Fella says, all out for 101. The last one out was a duck. It's only a joke. Fella gets on the telephone to Shannon Airport. He says, could you tell me how long does it take to fly from Shannon to New York? He says, just a moment. He says, thanks very much. Another 2 fellas playing snooker. And they're playing for 3 hours and they haven't potted the ball. Woman says, Michael, will we cheat? He says, what do we do? He says, we take that wooden thing away from the balls. It's only a joke. I was driving down to Kerry recently. I picked up this hitchhiker. And we're driving along. We get a little bit bored. I said, I have a little puzzle for you. Maybe you could work it out. He says, what's that? I said, brothers and sisters I have none, but this man's father is my father's son. Who is it? Oh, he says, I don't know that. I said, it's me. He said, that's very good. He says, come on. He says, I'll buy you a drink. Come on. And we went into this little bar and he got chatting to a few lads. He says, come here, lads, I've got a little puzzle for you. Brothers and sisters I have none, but this man's father's my father's son. Who is it? I said, it's you. No, he said, it's not. It's this fella here who gave me a lift down the road. The annual test came in the mental hospital to see who would be released, and the first one is brought in. The doctor says, a few simple questions, answer them correctly, you can pack your case and go home. Do you understand me? He says, I do, sir. Right, he says, the first question is, what would happen if I cut out one of your eyes? He says, I'd be partially blind. He says, correct. Second question, what would happen if I cut out your other eye? He says, I'd be totally blind. He says, very, very good. Pack your case, leave. Send the next fellow in. Well, he's going out. The next fellow is his friend. He says, Michael, I know the answers to the questions he's going to ask you. The answers are partially blind and totally blind. You give him those answers and you'll be right. So his friend goes in, he says, a few simple questions, answer them correctly, you can pack your case and leave. Do you understand? He says, I do, sir. Right, he says, the first question is, what would happen if I cut off one of your ears? Well, he said, that's very simple, doctor. He says, I'd be partially blind. He says, what would happen if I cut off your other ear? He says, I'd be totally blind. He says, how do you make that out? He says, me hat would fall down over me eyes. I had a fella in court the other day. The judge says, you're up in front of me for drinking. He says, right, judge, let's get started. He says, have you ever been up before me before? He says, I don't know, judge. He says, what time do you get up at? He says, you have anything to say for yourself?
Says, nothing at all, Your Honour. The judge was a bit deaf. He says to the clerk, he says, Clerk, what did he say? Clerk says, Judge, he says, nothing at all, Your Honour. So, my God, I could have sworn I saw his lips move. Well, the judge says, I'm holding this case in camera. Says, what does that mean, Judge? Says, look, he says, I know what it means. The officer knows what it means. The prosecution counsel knows what it means. The defence counsel knows what it means. And the jury knows what it means. So whether you know what it means or not, the case is being held in camera. What happened on the night in question with that young lady? Well, sir, he says, I was at a bit of a dance. I had a lovely time with this young lady, and we had a few drinks and a bit of supper. I walked her home and walked up through the Phoenix Park, and it was a lovely summer's evening. We sat down on a park bench and we chatted away for a while, and then we kissed and cuddled for another while. And then, Judge, I got slightly carried away. He says, hold on, he says, what do you mean by slightly carried away? Well, Judge, he says, I know what it means. The girl there knows what it means. The officer knows what it means. The defence counsel knows what it means. The prosecution counsel knows what it means. And the jury knows what it means. And, Judge, if you were there with your camera, you'd know what it meant. When me day is done and me course is run and I've walked on my last long beat up to heaven's door, I'll quickly soar and St. Peter himself I'll meet, and I hope he'll say in his kindly way, is it you, Tim of Vic? I see. Your reward is won for work well done. Flap your wings, Moriarty. Come on. You're a well-known bobby of the stalwart squad. I belong to the DMP. And the ladies cry when I pass by, are you there, Moriarty?